From a distance, it looks impossible. A vast white expanse stretches to the horizon, a wilderness of rippling dunes under a brutal sun. At first glance, it seems like a desert in the most familiar sense, empty, dry, severe, a place where life would have to fight for every drop of water. But then the rains arrive, and the landscape changes its mind. Between the dunes, in the hollows and seams of the sand, freshwater lagoons begin to appear. Clear water collects where there was only pale dune a few weeks before. Blue pools bloom across the white ground like an answer to a question no one has finished asking. Then, as if the land itself is breathing, the water starts to vanish again. This is Lençóis Maranhenses on Brazil's northeast coast, and it is one of the great contradictions of the natural world. It looks like a desert, but it does not behave like one. It floods every year. It dries out again. The lagoons come and go with the seasons, and the dunes that hold them are never quite in the same place twice. Nothing here is fixed for long. What seems permanent from a distance is, in fact, constantly being remade. That is the central mystery of this place. How can a landscape so dry on the surface become a temporary network of freshwater lagoons? How can sand and water coexist here in such abundance, when the eye insists they should exclude each other? The answer begins not with a single event, but with a set of conditions so unusual they only make sense when they are all seen together. Climate, wind, sediment, and the shape of the land all conspire to produce something that feels almost fictional until you stand in it. The park lies in Maranhão, where Brazil's coast meets a transition zone between several great biomes. It is not an inland desert born of endless aridity. It is a coastal landscape exposed to the forces that move sand along the edge of the Atlantic and to the rains that return each year with enough force to fill the depressions between the dunes. The region receives substantial rainfall, and that matters, because this is not a place where water never comes. It is a place where water comes, stays for a while, and then retreats. What makes the lagoons possible is not just the rain falling from above, but the ground beneath it. The sand does not simply swallow the water and let it disappear. In key areas, impermeable layers beneath the dunes slow the drainage, trapping the rain in basins between the ridges. For a season, those shallow hollows become mirrors of the sky. For a season, the dune field is transformed into a chain of lakes, and when the dry months return, the lagoons shrink, fragment, and fade until many of them are gone completely, leaving only the pale geometry of the dunes behind. Even the dunes themselves refuse to stand still. Wind pushes them forward, grain by grain, and the whole field migrates across the coast over time. These are not ancient, motionless hills of sand. They are moving forms, built and rebuilt by the sea's sediment, shaped by the wind, and rearranged by the weather. The landscape is in a state of permanent revision. A lagoon that exists one year may be smaller, shifted, or absent the next. A dune that rises here today may be farther on tomorrow. The park does not preserve a single image of nature. It preserves a process. That is what makes Lençóis Maranhenses so disorienting. The place seems to defy the categories we use to understand landscapes. It looks barren, yet it swells with water. It feels remote and timeless, yet it is always changing. It is beautiful in a way that can make beauty itself feel unstable, because what you are seeing is not one scene but a cycle. Accumulation, flooding, disappearance, return. For generations, this cycle remained a wonder of place and season. In 1981, the area was established as a federal protected park, a recognition that something rare was happening here and that it needed to be safeguarded. Decades later, the significance of the landscape reached beyond national borders. In 2024, it was inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, recognized for its exceptional natural beauty and the extraordinary geomorphology that produces it. But long before any title was awarded, the land had already made its own claim. It was a claim not of permanence, but of transformation. Because Lençóis Maranhenses is not trying to be a desert. It is showing us something stranger, a coast where sand moves like weather, where rain becomes lagoon, and where the ground itself seems to dissolve and reappear with the turning of the year. To understand how such a place exists, we have to go back before the water, before the lagoons, before the white emptiness that first catches the eye. We have to ask where all this sand came from in the first place. If the first mystery of Lençóis Maranhenses is the water, the second is the sand itself. Because a landscape like this does not begin in the middle of nowhere. It begins at an edge. It begins on a coast. Along the northeast shore of Brazil, in the state of Maranhão, the land opens toward the Atlantic in a long, exposed sweep. This is not a fixed border between sea and continent, but a living one, where waves break down old material, currents move it along the shoreline, and wind picks up what the water leaves behind. The park sits inside that restless transition zone, at a meeting point between major Brazilian biomes, where the coast is never entirely coast and the inland is never entirely inland. That is the setting that made this place possible, not an isolated desert basin, but a shoreline engine that keeps feeding sand into motion. The dunes of Lençóis Maranhenses are built from marine sediment. Over time, the sea supplies fine grains, and the coastal system sorts them, redistributes them, and leaves them exposed where wind can take over. Once the sand is dry enough, the breeze becomes the main architect. It lifts the grains from beaches and sandbars, pushes them inland, and piles them into low mounds that slowly rise, sharpen, and link together. What looks like stillness from a distance is actually movement at ground level, grain by grain, day by day. That is why the park is not a frozen field of sand. It is a migrating landscape. UNESCO describes the dunes here as mobile, shifting several meters each year. That movement is one of the defining facts of the place. The dunes do not stay where they are formed. They advance, they change shape, they bury older forms and expose new ones. In that sense, the park is less like a permanent surface and more like a slow wave made of sediment. Among the most recognizable shapes in this moving field are Barchan dunes, crescent-like forms with curved horns that point downwind. These dunes are the signatures of a system where sand supply, wind direction, and open space all matter. A Barchan dune grows as wind carries grains up its gentle slope and drops them over the crest. The dune edge on the windward side remains low and smooth, while the leeward side falls away more steeply. Over time, the whole shape creeps forward. It is a moving hill made not by rain and rivers, but by the pressure of the air itself. This matters because Barchans tell us something essential about Lençóis Maranhenses. The dunes are not random heaps, and they are not isolated. They belong to a coastal geomorphological process, a chain of interactions linking sea, shore, wind, and land. The sand is delivered to the coast by marine forces. The wind lifts it and organizes it. The dunes then migrate inland and reorganize the terrain beneath them. In one season, they may open a basin. In another, they may close it off or reshape it entirely. The landscape is always under construction. That constant rebuilding is why the park appears so extraordinary when seen from above or from a ridge of higher ground. The white dunes spread in broad fields, but they are not a static expanse. They are the visible trace of an ongoing transfer of material from one environment to another. The coast gives, the wind arranges, and the dunes travel. Even the spaces between them are part of the story, because those hollows are not empty in any lasting sense. They are temporary waiting places, shaped by the same forces that move the sand around them. In many places, the word desert suggests isolation, dryness, and geological silence. Lençóis Maranhenses is the opposite of that. It is loud with motion if you know how to read it. The shoreline keeps supplying sediment. The wind keeps reorganizing it. The dunes keep marching. The whole system breathes in slow motion, expanding inland and then shifting again, never quite settling into a final form. That is why the park's beauty is inseparable from its instability. The bright white surface people admire is not simply a gift of nature waiting to be photographed. It is the product of a process. The same forces that create the dunes also ensure they will not remain unchanged for long. A ridge today may become a hollow tomorrow. A corridor of sand may close. A basin may open where the wind has scoured away a little more grain. What seems permanent is really temporary, held in place only long enough for the next season to alter it. And that is the hidden logic behind the spectacle. Lençóis Maranhenses does not exist because the sand was dropped here once and stayed. It exists because the coast is continually making sand available, and the wind is continually shaping that material into a migrating field. The park is a coastal system in motion, a broad, breathing edge where the Atlantic is never far away, even when it cannot be seen. By the time you understand that, the white emptiness no longer feels empty. It feels active, assembled, and unfinished. The dunes are not remnants of some ancient inland wilderness. They are the present tense of the shoreline. And once you see the place that way, the next question becomes unavoidable. If this is a landscape built by moving sand, what happens when the rain arrives and fills those spaces with water? Why does the flooding stay long enough to become lagoons at all? The answer is not only in the sky. It is in the ground beneath the dunes and in the way this coast holds water instead of letting it escape. Once the rains arrive, Lençóis Maranhenses stops looking like a field of dry white movement and becomes something else entirely. The air still comes from the coast. The dunes still rise in pale ridges across the land. But now water begins to gather in the spaces between them. Not from rivers, not from a permanent lake, not from any inlet cutting through the sand. It comes straight from the sky, season after season, in a climate that is far from the arid world the landscape first suggests. This is not a true desert climate. It is semi-humid, and for part of the year, it receives enough rainfall to change the park's surface completely. At first, that seems impossible. Sand is supposed to swallow water. In many places, rain disappears quickly into the ground, drains away, and returns to the atmosphere before anyone notices. But here, the ground is doing something more complicated. The dunes are only the visible layer of a larger system, and beneath them are conditions that slow the water down instead of letting it vanish at once. Rain falls into the hollows between the dunes, fills the low points, and begins to pool. The water is fresh because it is rainwater, collected locally and held by the shape and structure of the terrain. The secret is not just that the sand is there. It is that the sand is sitting over layers that do not absorb and carry water away as quickly as the eye might expect. In effect, the land gives the rain nowhere convenient to go. The dunes themselves are porous on the surface, but the subsurface conditions help trap the water close to where it lands. The water table rises during the wet season, and in the lowest spaces between the dunes the water gathers above it, suspended in a shallow basin of sand. What looks like a flood is really a temporary balance, rainfall arriving faster than the system can drain it. That is why the lagoons take the forms they do. They are not deep inland lakes fed by distant watersheds. They are shallow, clear pools tucked into the bowl-like spaces between dunes, their edges drawn sharply by sand. Their boundaries can look almost deliberate, as if the landscape were outlining them in white. But their shape is simply the shape of the ground at the moment the rain comes. A hollow fills first, a larger basin fills later. Some lagoons stretch long and thin, others sit rounded and still. All of them are temporary, and all of them depend on the same basic arrangement: rain falling onto a mobile dune field with no easy path for runoff to escape. Because the water is rain-fed, the cycle is repeatable. It does not happen by accident once and then vanish into mystery. It returns because the conditions return. The rainy season brings the water, the sand holds it in place, and the lagoons appear again across the same vast white surface. Then the dry season arrives, evaporation increases, the water level drops, and the lagoons shrink or disappear altogether. What remains is the memory of water held briefly in the land's hollows, waiting for the next season to refill them. That is what gives the park its strange precision. The transformation is dramatic, but it is not random. It follows a pattern written by climate, terrain, and the hidden structure beneath the dunes. Every year, the same broad mechanism turns open sand into a scattered field of freshwater lagoons, and then turns the lagoons back into sand again. The miracle is not that water appears here once. The miracle is that it can happen repeatedly in almost the same place, under the same sky, because the landscape is built to catch it. And yet even this explanation only gets us so far. If the lagoons are temporary, why do they return in one place and not another? Why does the pattern shift from year to year? To understand that, you have to follow the dunes themselves, because the ground that traps the water is never staying still for long. From a distance, Lençóis Maranhenses can look almost frozen in place, a vast white expanse, smooth as poured flour, held under a hard tropical sky. But the stillness is an illusion. This is not a landscape that sits and waits to be described. It is a landscape in motion, changing shape grain by grain, season by season, year by year. The dunes do not belong to one position for long. They travel. Wind is the first force in that movement. It gathers sand from the coast, lifts it, and pushes it inland, building dune after dune into a shifting field that never quite settles into a final arrangement. UNESCO describes these dunes as migrating several meters each year, and that slow motion is enough to redraw the park over time. What seems permanent in one season may have moved on by the next. A ridge that looked like a boundary becomes a slope. A hollow that held water once may be buried, reshaped, or exposed somewhere else entirely. And because the dunes move, the lagoons move with them. They do not occupy fixed addresses on a map. They appear where the terrain allows them to appear, in the spaces between dunes that happen, for a moment, to be in the right configuration to trap rainwater. One year, a lagoon may spread wide and shallow across a basin. The next year, that same basin may be narrower, deeper, or gone altogether, replaced by a new hollow a little farther away. The water itself is seasonal, but the stage it rests on is always being rearranged beneath it. That is why no single aerial view can ever fully explain this place. A photograph can capture the elegance of the pattern, the bright white arcs of sand and the blue-green pools tucked between them. But it cannot show how quickly the pattern changes once the winds return. It cannot show how a lagoon's shoreline contracts, or how a basin that held water in one rainy season is stranded dry in the next. It cannot show the quiet, continuous labor of the wind pushing the dunes onward, or the way the landscape keeps rewriting its own map while no one is looking. The apparent emptiness is what makes the motion so easy to miss. There are no forests to sway, no cliffs to crumble dramatically, no rivers cutting obvious channels through the terrain. Instead, there is surface after surface of pale sand, repeating itself until the eye assumes sameness. But sameness is not the same as stability. Under that broad, clean-looking expanse is a field of constant adjustment. Each dune is part of a system that is still assembling itself, still being carried, still being sorted by air, rain, and the underlying coastal geology that gives the whole place its shape. Over the long term, this means the park is not merely a collection of dunes and lakes. It is the visible moment in a much larger process, one that began with marine sediment, was sculpted by wind, and continues to be influenced by the way the coast exchanges material with the inland interior. The dunes exist because sand is available to be moved. The lagoons exist because the rain is heavy enough to fill the hollows before the dry season can erase them. And the field endures because neither force ever fully wins. Wind rearranges the ground. Rain answers with water. Then the water fades and the sand starts moving again. That cycle creates a landscape that feels temporary even when it has been there for generations. The park itself was created as a protected area in 1981, but the country may have drawn a boundary around it. The dunes never accepted one. They continue to migrate beyond any fixed frame of reference, carrying the illusion of stillness with them. What appears to be a single place is really a succession of places, each one brief, each one dependent on the exact balance of motion and moisture that happens to exist at that moment. This is why the region's beauty has such a strange force. It is not only the contrast of white sand and blue water, it is the knowledge that the scene will not last in exactly this form. The lagoon at your feet will shrink, the ridge beyond it will shift. The view from this hill will not be repeated exactly the same way again. The park offers no promise of permanence, only recurrence with variation. The return of sand, the return of rain, the return of water caught between dunes that are never quite where they used to be. And that instability is not a flaw in the landscape. It is the landscape. The park is not a static desert laid out for the eye. It is a moving coastal system, a place of transitions, a surface always in the middle of becoming something else. To understand it, you have to stop looking for a fixed picture and start seeing a process. The dunes are not scenery, they are motion made visible. Once you see that, the question changes. It is no longer only how water stays in a place that looks so dry. It becomes another question entirely. What kind of land can hold so many forms at once? And why does this shifting terrain support life at all? To answer that, we have to step away from the moving sand for a moment and look at the larger meeting place it creates. If the dunes of Lençóis Maranhenses seem to belong to no ordinary map, that is because they sit in a place where maps begin to overlap. This is not an empty edge of Brazil. It is a meeting ground. Here, on the northeast coast of Maranhão, the land sits in a transition zone where the Cerrado, the Caatinga, and the Amazon all leave their influence behind. None of them fully owns this place. Instead, each one presses in from a different direction, and the park becomes the space between them, shaped by all three. That is part of what makes the landscape so unusual. The bright sand and open horizons create the first impression, but the park is not a blank page. It is a borderland, and borderlands are rarely simple. The wind that pushes the dunes inland is carrying material from the coast. The rain that arrives in the wet season is not the kind of rare, precious rain that defines a true desert. It is enough to transform the ground, to fill the hollows between the dunes, to saturate pockets of the surface long enough for temporary lagoons to appear. And around those shifting basins, life gathers wherever conditions allow it. Along the edges of the dune field, vegetation takes hold in places where the sand can settle and hold moisture for a little longer. Restinga plants, adapted to coastal soils and harsh exposure, form a first line of green against the white dunes. They survive where salt spray, heat, wind, and shifting substrate make permanence difficult. Their presence marks the boundary between movement and stability, between the open sands and the more sheltered parts of the coast. In other places, mangroves and wetland vegetation appear where fresh water and tidal influence shape the ground differently, especially in the broader coastal landscape around the park. Each of these ecosystems belongs to a different set of conditions, and yet all of them are part of the same regional pattern. What unites them is not similarity, but exchange. The park sits inside a system of gradients. Salinity changes from coast to inland. Moisture changes from season to season. Soil changes from loose dune sand to wetter, more consolidated ground. Exposure changes from open, wind-scoured ridges to protected hollows where water lingers after the rains. In one direction, the climate and vegetation begin to resemble drier Brazilian regions. In another, the influence of the Amazonian world can still be felt through humidity and seasonal rainfall. This is why the park cannot be understood as a fixed environment. It is an ecological crossroads, and every crossing creates variety. The freshwater lagoons are central to that variety. They are not isolated ornaments scattered across the dunes. They are temporary habitats, formed by the relationship between rain, sand, and the impermeable layers beneath the surface that keep the water from draining away too quickly. When they fill, they change everything around them. The edges of the lagoons become feeding grounds, resting places, breeding spaces, and corridors for species that can make use of these fleeting conditions. As the water rises and falls, the surrounding vegetation responds in turn. Some plants tolerate saturation. Others wait for the water to recede. Some roots reach for stability in the sand, while other species depend on the wet season's brief abundance. That is why Lençóis Maranhenses is more than a scenic expanse of white dunes and blue pools. Its beauty comes from the same forces that make it biologically distinct. The dunes create isolation, but not absolute isolation. The rain creates water, but not permanence. The coast brings salt, wind, and sediment. The broader region brings ecological influence from multiple directions. Out of those contrasts comes a habitat mosaic, and each patch supports a different kind of life. The park is not one landscape repeated endlessly. It is a sequence of conditions, each one narrow, changing, and valuable in its own way. Seen this way, the dunes are not just dramatic forms on the horizon. They are part of a larger living system, one built by movement, weather, and the meeting of regions. The lagoons are not accidental pools. They are temporary answers to a very specific geography. The coastal vegetation is not decoration at the margins. It is evidence that the land is still negotiating its own limits. And the fact that so many forms of life can exist here at all tells us something important. In Lençóis Maranhenses, instability is not the opposite of richness. It is the condition that makes richness possible. The more closely you look, the clearer it becomes that the park's identity comes from tension. Dry and wet, sand and water, coast and inland, dune field and wetland. It is a place assembled from contrasts, and those contrasts do more than shape the scenery. They create the rules by which life has to work here. The next question is no longer only what the land looks like. It is how anything survives on such a shifting foundation, and what kinds of plants, animals, and communities have learned to live inside a place that is always changing shape. If the land here seems to disappear each year, life has learned not to stand still with it. In Lençóis Maranhenses, survival depends on reading the calendar of rain and sand with almost perfect precision. For part of the year, the surface looks bare and exposed, a bright field of shifting dunes under hard light. Then the rains arrive. The hollows between the dunes begin to fill, and the same ground becomes a network of temporary lagoons. What can live here must be able to endure both worlds, the long dry intervals when water is scarce, and the brief wet season when water is everywhere, but never for long. That rhythm shapes everything. Plants do not colonize the open dunes the way they would in a stable forest or grassland, because the sand keeps moving and the fresh terrain is constantly being remade. Only the hardiest pioneers can take hold in the margins, where a little moisture lingers, and the wind has not yet erased the evidence of the last season. These are the first settlers of an unstable country, species that can root quickly, endure poor soil, and return again after the landscape resets. They do not tame the dunes, they make temporary peace with them. The lagoons bring their own burst of life. As rainwater gathers in the basins, it creates short-lived habitats for feeding, breeding, and movement. Animals that can use the water do so quickly because nothing here is permanent. Some arrive with the floods, some follow the edges, and some depend on the brief abundance that appears when the rain is at its peak. For a season, the park becomes a chain of shimmering rest stops and nursery grounds, each one tied to the next by the water level and the shape of the sand. When the dry months return, those connections break apart again, and survival once more becomes a matter of moving on before the ground turns empty. This is why adaptation in Lençóis Maranhenses is not just about endurance, it is about timing. To live here is to know when to germinate, when to breed, when to feed, when to travel, and when to wait. The dunes themselves are in motion, migrating across the coast over time, and the life around them has had to become equally alert to change. A plant that grows too early may be buried. An animal that lingers too long may find the water gone. Even the fresh water that appears so sudden and miraculous is part of a larger negotiation between rainfall, groundwater, sediment, wind, and the ever-shifting architecture of the coast. The human communities at the edge of the park have long lived inside that same rhythm. Towns and settlements around the dunes are not separate from the landscape's cycle. They are shaped by it. People here have had to build livelihoods around a place that offers beauty, water, and movement, but never certainty. Travel routes, seasonal work, access to lagoons, and the changing conditions of the dunes all influence how daily life unfolds. The landscape is not just what they live beside. It is part of the way they live. That makes Lençóis Maranhenses feel less like an empty expanse than a living system of arrivals and departures. The season of rain brings one version of the park. The dry season reveals another. Between them, the dunes keep moving, the lagoons keep appearing and fading, and life keeps adjusting to a world that never quite holds still. And because that transformation is so rare, so beautiful, and so difficult to look away from, the park was destined to step beyond Brazil's northeast coast and into a much larger story. For a long time, Lençóis Maranhenses belonged first to the people who lived near it, then to the travelers who found their way there by rumor, and only much later to the world at large. It was always spectacular, but spectacle alone does not guarantee recognition. A place still has to be named, mapped, protected, and explained before it can be understood as something more than a beautiful accident. In 1981, Brazil created Lençóis Maranhenses National Park, placing this shifting coast of sand and freshwater under federal protection. That decision was an admission as much as a safeguard. This was not a landscape that could simply be admired and left alone. It needed to be managed as a living system, because everything about it was in motion. The dunes do not sit still long enough to become scenery in the ordinary sense. They advance with the wind, meters at a time over the years, reshaping the ground beneath them and changing the spaces where water collects. The lagoons rise and fall with the rains, and the whole park behaves less like a fixed image than a repeating event. That is part of what made the site so remarkable to UNESCO when it inscribed Lençóis Maranhenses as a World Heritage Site in 2024. The The recognition was not just for beauty, although beauty was central to it. It was also for geomorphology, for a coastline built by marine sediment, wind, rainfall, and time, and for a landscape whose essential character lies in constant transformation. UNESCO's designation placed the park among the world's most significant natural places, but the reasons were rooted in something surprisingly specific. This is not a true desert in the climatological sense. It is a semi-humid coastal environment, receiving enough rain each year to feed the lagoons that appear between the dunes. The sand may look dry and empty from a distance, but below the surface the story is more complicated. Rainwater gathers where it cannot easily drain away, and when the wet season peaks, the park fills with temporary lakes of clear freshwater. Then the dry season returns, the water recedes, and the dunes reassert themselves. That cycle is not a background detail. It is the very reason the place exists in the form people recognize. Once the park entered the global spotlight, the rhythm that had always defined it took on a new meaning. The same seasonal window that creates the most famous views also concentrates attention. Travelers arrive when the lagoons are full, when the white dunes and blue water produce the images that have made Lençóis Maranhenses famous around the world. In that sense, the park's peak season is also its public season, the moment when the landscape becomes most legible to outsiders. What had once been a regional wonder now had a schedule, and that schedule began drawing more and more people toward a place that was never built to hold them. That is where recognition becomes consequence. A protected area does not stop being fragile because it becomes celebrated. If anything, attention can sharpen the pressure on the very qualities that made the place worth admiring in the first place. More visitors mean more demand for access, transport, lodging, guides, and infrastructure. They also mean more responsibility for the agencies and communities that must decide how close people can come, where they can go, and what must be left untouched. In a landscape built from movement, those questions are never simple. Paths shift, dunes migrate, water appears where there was none a month earlier. Management here is not about freezing the park in a perfect state, because no such state exists. It is about keeping the system alive without letting its fame overwhelm its balance. That tension is what gives Lençóis Maranhenses its larger significance. The park is admired because it seems impossible, but it endures only because it is real, because it obeys the forces that formed it, and because people have begun to treat those forces with care. Federal protection in Brazil gave the landscape a legal boundary. UNESCO gave it global stature. Tourism gave it a wider audience and a stronger economic role. Together, those things have turned a once-hidden coastline into a landmark whose future matters far beyond Maranhão. And yet the most important fact about Lençóis Maranhenses has not changed. It remains a place defined by its cycles, not by permanence. The lakes will come and go. The dunes will move. The park will continue to look different from one season to the next, and that is not a problem to solve. It is the very thing that makes the landscape extraordinary. The challenge now is to let the world witness that transformation without interrupting it, because the more people come to see this place, the more urgent the question becomes. How do you protect something whose beauty depends on never staying the same? Lençóis Maranhenses has always asked for a different kind of respect, not the respect we give to monuments carved from stone or forests that stand in place for centuries, or cities that announce their endurance in brick and steel. This is a place that survives by refusing to stay still. Its dunes do not hold a final shape. Its lagoons do not remain. The surface of the park is written, erased and written again by wind, rain, and time. What makes it extraordinary is not that it resists change, but that it depends on it. That is the central paradox at the heart of this landscape. The white sand seems to promise permanence from a distance, a vast pale expanse that could be mistaken for something fixed and timeless. But the closer you look, the clearer it becomes that nothing here is meant to last in the form you found it. The dunes migrate, the depressions between them fill and empty. The water appears when the rains arrive, then sinks, evaporates, and retreats as the dry season advances. In one season, a lagoon may be broad and bright enough to mirror the sky. In another, the same hollow may be bare sand, waiting to receive the next cycle of rain. The park's beauty is inseparable from that rhythm of disappearance and return. That makes preservation unusually complicated. In most protected landscapes, conservation can mean holding a shape in place, defending a boundary, keeping a system from being broken by change that does not belong there. But here, change is not the enemy, it is the mechanism. The dunes are supposed to move, the lagoons are supposed to come and go. The seasonal flood is not a threat to the landscape's identity. It is the reason that identity exists at all. Protecting Lençóis Maranhenses means protecting the conditions that allow movement to continue. The wind that carries and redistributes sand, the rainfall that gathers in the hollows, the coastal processes that feed the dune field, and the delicate balance of a terrain where water cannot simply drain away. That balance is what makes the park fragile. A landscape built on cycles can be disrupted in ways that are not always obvious at first. If the dunes are altered, the lagoons change. If the water regime shifts, the seasonality changes. If human pressure grows too quickly, the very experience that draws people here can begin to wear away the thing they came to see. A place defined by transformation can still be damaged, even if the damage does not look like a crack in a wall or a fallen roof. Sometimes it looks like a change in timing, or in scale, or in the quiet relationship between sand and water that has held for generations. And now the world is watching. UNESCO recognition brought a new kind of attention to Lençóis Maranhenses, the kind that can help protect a place by making it impossible to ignore. International status can strengthen conservation, sharpen public awareness, and draw resources to a landscape that needs them. It can also increase pressure, inviting more visitors, more infrastructure, more demand to make a wild and seasonal place feel stable and accessible on human terms. The challenge is not whether to share Lençóis Maranhenses with the world. In many ways, that sharing is a victory. The challenge is whether the world can be taught to visit without trying to freeze what it has come to admire. Because this park is not a museum exhibit, it is not a static scene arranged once and then preserved under glass. It is a living process. The dunes are part of a coastal system in motion, and the lagoons are part of a yearly renewal that depends on rain arriving in the right season and sand continuing to shift under the force of the wind. The landscape is always becoming something else, even while it remains unmistakably itself. That is why it can seem to vanish and reappear. Not because it is lost, but because its identity is tied to the act of changing. To stand before it is to understand that permanence is not the only form of value. Some places matter because they endure. Others matter because they transform in ways that can still be trusted, still be recognized, still return. Lençóis Maranhenses belongs to the second kind. Its meaning lies in renewal. Each rainy season restores the water. Each dry season reveals the sand. Each year the park redefines itself, and each year it offers the same lesson in a new arrangement, that beauty can be cyclical, that fragility can be part of strength, and that a landscape does not have to remain unchanged to remain whole. So the future of this place will depend on a difficult kind of protection, one that does not try to stop the dunes from moving or the lagoons from fading, but instead safeguards the conditions that let the cycle continue. That is a different conservation ethic, and perhaps a more demanding one. It asks people not just to admire the view, but to understand the process behind it. It asks governments, scientists, and visitors to think in seasons rather than snapshots, in patterns rather than moments. It asks us to accept that the most important thing about a place may be the thing we cannot hold still. In the end, Lençóis Maranhenses is not a desert that has been saved from water. It is a world that is made by water, by wind, and by the restless edge between land and sea. Its brilliance comes from the fact that it never fully settles. The dunes will keep moving, the lagoons will keep returning, the surface will keep changing its mind, and that is the final truth of this flooded desert. The flood does not erase it. The flood is what keeps it alive.